Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to tonight's webinar, ACT, SAT, or both. My name's Lindsay. I'm hosting alongside our TPR expert, Teresa. Just so you know, everyone who's on the line, your lines are muted, but if you have any questions, feel free to use the questions panel or the chat panel, and we'll try and respond at the end of the webinar. If we don't get to your question tonight, don't worry, someone will reach out to you from the Princeton Review team, or you can always email questions@review.com. But for now, let's go ahead and get it started. I'm going to send it over to Teresa.
Great, thanks Lindsay. Hi everybody, my name is Teresa Bradley. I am the Outreach Manager here in the St. Louis office of the Princeton Review. I've also been an ACT, SAT, and PSAT teacher and tutor for the last 6 years. So I'm super happy to be here with you all today to talk to you about the ACT, the SAT, or both. So that's a little bit about who I am. If you wouldn't mind answering this quick poll about who you guys are. So Lindsay, if you wouldn't mind launching that poll. Okay. Can you all see the poll question? Lindsay, can you see it?
Yep, we're getting some results in. We're collecting responses.
Fantastic.
Let's see, I'll give it one more second.
So who do we have with us today? What was
We've
the
got
majority there?
62% students and 38% parents.
Fantastic. Well, welcome everybody. So our goal today is to answer many, maybe even all of your ACT versus SAT questions with the ultimate goal of alleviating some of the stress that might be surrounding both of these tests. We've got some great information for you, but like Lindsay said, if you have any questions, I'm definitely going to be saving time at the end of the presentation to answer your questions. So feel free to go ahead and put them in the chat box when you think of them, or save them for the end as well. So how are we going to accomplish this goal today? Here is our agenda for the night. The first thing we're going to talk about is some truths, misconceptions about the ACT and or the SAT. We're going to talk about some strategies for actually approaching the tests, as well as review some sample problems. And ultimately, we're going to talk about, we're going to finish this off with how the Princeton Review can help you guys as you're working your way through deciding which test you want to take or actually preparing for that exam. So let's start with a couple of truths and misconceptions. So being an ACT and SAT teacher for the last 6 years, I've definitely heard lots of fun theories about how the test is written, why the test is written, or some tricks of the trade. We're going to go over some of those truths and misconceptions now. One of the first things that I want to immediately bash is that it did used to be true that some schools required the SAT or some schools required the ACT, but that is no longer true. All schools accept both the ACT or the SAT as part of their college admissions process. Colleges have no preference, and you may take one or both of them. It is becoming more and more popular to take both tests. If you do decide to take a Princeton Review class, we do actually allow all students access to prep for both. So if you were to sign up for an ACT prep class, you would actually receive access to SAT prep materials as well in your online student center. So this first just misconception, just make it as clear as possible. It's ultimately up to you guys which test you want to take. It's often compared to like Pepsi or Coke, right? That they are ultimately a brown cola product, but some people prefer one and some students prefer the other. So that's what we're going to talk about today, the differences and the similarities between the two tests to help you guys decide which one you might prefer if you haven't started the actual test prep process yet. So here we have our first look at the ACT versus SAT, just side by side at a glance. We're going to go into all of this in much further detail, but there are two things that I really want to point out on this slide. The first is the timing. Both of these tests are right around 3 hours long. The time outside the parentheses, that's the time for the multiple choice or free response questions. And the time inside the parentheses is the time that includes the essay, if you decide to take the essay, which we will discuss. So 3-hour tests. These are really going to be the marathons of exams for a lot of the students. For many students, this might be the longest test that you take in your high school career. So the analogy I always make is most of us couldn't wake up and just run a marathon tomorrow. Most of us would have to do a little prep, maybe throw in some 5Ks at the beginning. That is definitely the ACT and the SAT. These two tests are the marathons of tests. They are very long, and it does take time and stamina to get used to taking this long of a test. Another thing I want to point out is the number of questions. This is the first big difference between the ACT and the SAT. Even though both tests are right at 3 hours long, the ACT is going to ask students to answer 215 questions, and the SAT is going to ask 154. Now, I don't want to say only 154 because that's still a lot of questions, but definitely much fewer than on the ACT. So one of the things that students might want to start considering is time management. Is time management what's holding you back? Are you consistently running out of time? If you're practicing for the ACT, then maybe you want to try the SAT. That's just the first point of difference between the two tests that I would like to point out. So the next thing we're going to do is we're actually going to break down the ACT and the SAT section by section. Before we do this, though, I do want to get a sense of people on the call. What are you planning on taking? Do we have a lot of ACT students, a lot of SAT, or students that are planning to take both? So Lindsay, thank you so much. If you wouldn't mind just quickly answering for me, are you looking at the ACT, the SAT, or are you planning on taking both? What's it look like, Lindsay?
Looks like we've got 60% of folks planning on taking both, 10% saying SAT only, around 3% saying ACT only, and the rest of the folks are just not sure yet.
That is perfectly fine. That's why you're on this call, right? To start figuring out which tests you might want to take. So we'll definitely make sure that we go over lots of information about both tests. So let's start with the ACT. So the ACT is always going to have 4 main multiple choice sections, followed by an optional essay. The first section is always going to be an English test. This English test is really a grammar test. You're going to have 45 minutes to do 75 questions. If you break that down, that's about 36 seconds a question. That is not a lot of time. You definitely need to be moving at a pretty rapid pace to get through all of the questions on the English section of the ACT. Immediately following this grammar test, you're going to jump right into a math test. This math test is 60 minutes, 60 questions, and you're going to cover arithmetic, algebra 1 and 2, plane and coordinate geometry, as well as a little bit of trig. So a wide breadth of content. And it's not organized by subject. You can have an algebra question and then immediately a geometry question and then over to arithmetic. This minute a question sounds more forgiving than the English section, and it is. However, you have to keep in mind some of these questions are straightforward, what we'd call plug and chug questions, where they give you a formula, you plug in a variable and solve. And some of the questions are going to be multi-step word problems. Now, the word problems are going to be very tough to finish in a minute a question. So again, you're going to have to be moving at a pretty quick pace if your goal is to answer all of the questions on this section. Immediately after the math section, you get a 10-minute break. That's not factored into our timing here, but that is usually a lot of students' favorite part of the ACT. Immediately after the break, students will come back and do a reading test. So 35-minute, 40-question reading test. That's about 52 seconds a question. Keeping in mind that is also including the time it takes to read the material needed to answer the question. The reading section is going to be broken down into 4 reading passages, and it might honestly be one of the strategies of the ACT test writers to make the reading section as boring as possible. The reading section of the ACT, you will probably not have ever heard of the authors or of the studies that they're referring to, and the material but it is relatively straightforward, the questions that they ask, and it is a relatively straightforward reading test. It's a matter of many times just go fetch, treating it like a scavenger hunt, working through the questions and going to find the answers as they're presented in the reading material. Immediately after the reading, students will have a science test. This is 35 minutes and 40 questions. The science test, science is really a misnomer. It's not really a science test. There's very little, if any, science content being tested on the science test. It's much more a science reasoning exam. You're going to be presented with charts and graphs and questions about experiments and questions about multiple hypotheses, or one topic with multiple hypotheses and comparing and contrasting those hypotheses, but it is not pure science content knowledge. So for some people on the call, that might be a relief, and some people who really love science, who are looking forward to answering just straightforward biology questions, that might be kind of a letdown, because unfortunately, there's not going to be a ton of just straightforward, if any, straightforward biology or physics or chemistry questions. After the science section, you get a little break and you can come back and do the optional writing section. The essay is not factored in to your composite score. It is optional. Here at the Princeton Review, we do highly encourage you to take the essay section at least once, and I will talk about why in just a couple of slides. So in comparison, let's talk about the SAT. One of the things you're going to start immediately realizing, which we've already talked about, is there's definitely more time per question allotted on the SAT. The SAT time management is a little bit more forgiving. If I was only given one sentence to compare the ACT versus the SAT, the ACT is a content test, while the SAT is a critical thinking test. The SAT is very critical thinking based, and I think that's one of the most obvious ways that is how it starts, the reading section. The reading section, you're going to have 5 passages. The SAT loves pulling excerpts from historical documents, famous works of literature, or famous speeches. Do not be surprised if you have read that book before, or if you've studied that speech or studied that historical document, and you therefore understand the context that that text is actually written in. That is a very popular strategy of the SAT, is to actually use well-known pieces of writing. In that 65 minutes, you'll have 5 passages and 52 questions about those 5 passages. These questions will tend to be a little bit more context heavy and can definitely ask about tone or literary functions utilized by the author in order to complete a specific goal or purpose. Immediately after the reading section, you're going to have a writing and language section, W&L. That stands for writing and language. The writing and language section is our grammar test, very similar to the English section on the ACT, but much shorter, 35 or less questions at least. 35 minutes and 44 questions. So if we remember, the English section on the ACT was 45 minutes and 75 questions. So only 10 minutes less, but over 30 questions less. So definitely more time per question allotted. After the writing and language section, you'll get a little break, and you'll come back and you'll do the math sections. Notice there are 2 math sections here. Why is that? Math section number 1, you are not allowed to use a calculator. Now, there is very little difference, if any, of the content found in Math Section 1 and Math Section 2, or really the difficulty level of Math Section 1 versus Math Section 2. Really, the only difference is you're not allowed to use a calculator for math section 1. Here is a trade secret. You do not actually need a calculator for any of the math on either the SAT or the ACT. You can do all the math by hand. Now, for some of the questions, it's definitely easier to have a calculator handy and to be well versed in how to properly function that calculator. For instance, if you have to divide decimals, that's long division if you have to do it by hand. And when was the last time any of us actually had to do long division by hand? But it is doable. So do not let the fact that you can't use a calculator freak you out. You can definitely do this math. But that is why they have the two math sections separated out. You are not allowed to use a calculator on the first section, and you are allowed to use a calculator on the second section. Now, these two math tests on the SAT going to be mostly multiple choice, but both sections will have a couple of what we call free response questions. These free response questions require students to write in their own answer. So I want to be really careful whenever you're doing the math to make sure that you you write in your answer correctly, because you will not get any credit for the work that you did in your test booklet. Like you might in school, sometimes teachers will give credit for the work you actually do in your test booklet. That is not the case on the ACT or the SAT. It's only the answer that you put on your final Scantron or answer sheet. So be very careful with those free response questions that you fill out the answer form correctly. Okay, after the math sections, you're going to have your essay. Again, this is an optional essay. Here on the SAT, it's going to be 50 minutes with one essay prompt. Okay, so that's kind of the structure side of further breakdown of the ACT versus the SAT. So what do these tests measure? And here we have another poll question. Try to keep everybody engaged in this seminar. So what are these if Lindsay, if you wouldn't mind launching that poll question for me, if you have it available. What do these tests measure? What do you guys think?
Sorry, just give me 1 second. We're having a little bit of a slow computer. Let's see.
Not a problem. Okay, guys, what do you think these tests measure? Do you think they measure how smart you are? Do you think they measure how well you're going to do in college? Do you think they measure how well you're doing in high school? What are some of your thoughts?
It looks like about 40% say it's your potential success in college. Another around 40% say it's how well you take a test. And the rest say what you've learned in high school, about 25%.
Okay, so there are some right and wrong answers with this. So we're going to go through some of these misconceptions. Before I go through this chart, I do want to take a quick second to discuss why we even take these tests. As the college-going culture in the United States grew, college admissions officers needed to find a way to quantify their incredibly diverse incoming applicant pool. So they started introducing ACT and SAT, or the standardized tests, as part of the application. Now, the thought process with these standardized tests is that it's a way to quote unquote even the playing field. At the Princeton Review, we study these tests, and we've come to find that they are deeply flawed. We know that there's a lot of issues with these tests. And one of the issues is really that they don't set students up for success. Now, students bear the burden of taking the test, and parents often bear the burden of paying for the students to take the test. But we are not the ultimate end users of this data. At the end of the day, it's college admissions officers. They're the ones who are utilizing this data. So we want to keep that in mind as we look at what do these tests really test, and what do they really measure of me as a student taking the ACT. So the first thing that I want to just say flat out is these tests do not measure how smart you are. That is absolutely false. gave the next one a little bit away, but these tests do not measure how smart you are. They only measure how well you take the test. Now, they can be used towards awarding aid, or what we would call merit-based scholarships. Oftentimes when we think of the ACT and SAT, we think of it first and foremost, which is true, as an admissions test, a portion of our admissions process. But we definitely want to factor in at a lot of universities that do give merit-based scholarships. So merit-based scholarships, that's our favorite money. Scholarship, meaning it's free, you don't have to pay it back. That's our favorite. And merit-based, meaning it's based upon the work that you have already done. So your achievements in high school. ACT and SAT scores are almost always factored in to those merit-based scholarship packages. So ACT and SAT scores, improving your ACT or SAT scores is sometimes a great way to get some extra money for school. Do they reflect your GPA in high school? No. Again, what do they test? They test how well you take the test. So these exams are not predicting or not saying how well you're doing in high school. In fact, some of the most frustrated students that I work with are students that are just killing it in high school. They have great grades, great GPA, great class standing, but they just can't get a handle on these standardized tests. With the ACT and the SAT, that is incredibly frustrating because it is written in such a different manner than the tests that we have to take every day in school, which is definitely something that we're going to talk about. Does it predict how well you do in college? No, absolutely not. Again, the only thing that this test measures is how well you take the test. As many of us who have gone through college might know, our ACT or SAT scores definitely didn't predict how well we would or would not do. And I'm sure parents have lots of anecdotes about their peers or friends and how that might be true. Can they be prepared for, and should they be prepared for? Yes and yes. So again, who are the end users of this data? It's college admissions officers. They need these tests to quote unquote even the playing field. Therefore, they're incredibly standardized. This is one of the major perks for us as students who are taking the test and people who help students prepare for taking this test, is that they are incredibly standardized. What is covered, how it's covered, when it's covered, and how it's scored has to be almost identical administration over administration. For instance, if we're having two students applying to college in the same year and one student took the ACT in October and got a 24 and the other student took the ACT in February and got a 24, they would have to mean this, those scores would have to mean the same thing to a college admissions officer. Therefore, the test would have to be incredibly similar and the scoring scale would have to be very standardized. So they can be prepared for because we know exactly what's going to be on them, and they should be prepared for because it's a test you're going to be tackling, so why not put your best foot forward? Does it test what you learned in high school? Yes and no. Actually, a lot of what's on the ACT and the SAT you learned before high school. The grammar rules that are tested on the English section of the ACT. We started learning grammar way before high school. Arithmetic and algebra that are tested on both the ACT and the SAT. Again, we started studying those subjects of math long before high school. So yes, it definitely tests what's on the ACT and the SAT. It does test what's is tested in high school, what you learned in high school, excuse me, but it's also what you've learned before high school as well. So whenever we're talking about the structure of the test, next thing we definitely need to talk about how the test is scored. The SAT, you will receive two subject tests or subject test scores. The math evidence-based math score is a 400 score. And that is for the two math sections, 200, 800. And then evidence-based reading and writing is 200, 800. And that is your reading and writing and language section. Those two subscores are added together to give you a total score of 400 to 800 on the SAT. The ACT is you get a score of 1 through 36 for English, math, reading, and science, and those four subtest scores are averaged together to give you a composite score of a 1 through 36. So whenever you say I got a blank on the SAT or ACT, you're referring to the SAT total score out of 1600 and the ACT composite score out of 36. Again, the essay is not factored into the composite score on the ACT, so that is just an optional separate score. When we're looking at these tests side by side, now all universities accept both the ACT and the SAT, so they will have a comparison chart like the one in front of you here. So where they can say a 25 on the ACT is comparable to a 1220 on the SAT. They also will be looking at national percentages, which would line up with this comparison chart as well. The natural next question is always going to be, whenever we're talking about scores, is what is a good score? Well, so again, why are we taking these tests? As part of an application, and our college admissions officers are the end users of this data, and it's not testing how smart we are. So what's a good score? A good score is the score that gets you into the school that you want to go to, with potentially some merit-based scholarships to help you pay for it. A good score is not getting higher than your older sibling, or the best score in your friend group, or the best score on your block, or just some number that you have arbitrarily picked out of the air and you've decided this is what a good score is for me. A good score is the score that gets you into the school that you want to go to. So that means we have to start with research. Start looking at the schools that you are potentially interested in, and look at their admissions standards pages or their application. They will almost always advertise what the average scores or median scores for their matriculating freshmen from the previous year, as far as GPA or ACT or SAT scores were. That is where you should start cultivating this idea of a goal score based on research of the schools that you are actually interested in attending. That is what should shape your goal score and what dictates what a good score is for you, based on research of the schools that you want to go to. Now, we talked about this a little bit before, but we always want to keep in mind that the ACT and the SAT scores are not just about admissions, they're also about merit-based scholarships and the potential for scholarship money. Now, if a school does offer merit-based scholarships, they will be very transparent about that. So when you're researching schools and you're looking at their admissions pages, you should meander over to their financial aid page as well. Are they a university that gives merit-based scholarships? And if so, what ACT and SAT scores do I need to hit in order to get a chunk of that change? Again, this should definitely be part of your research process when you're looking into what schools you might be interested in. Some schools are incredibly generous. Some schools save all their scholarship for financial aid for students who are need-based. It is really up to the university how they want to spend their scholarship money on their incoming freshman students, or to attract their incoming freshman students. But it is always worth the research to find out what the school that you're interested in might be offering you. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about which test, keeping all these things in mind, which test might be the best fit for you. Now again, a lot of students are opting to prepare and take both the ACT and the SAT. That is a perfectly fine plan, and that might be something that you decide to do. Again, that is, if you were to take a Princeton Review class, you would receive access to material for both of the tests. So a couple of things that we want to keep in mind. The SAT questions require more time to understand and answer. Again, the SAT is much more of a critical thinking test. Yes, they do require more time to understand and answer them, but you are given more time as part of the SAT. It's a more forgiving time management question. Or test, excuse me. The ACT questions tend to be more straightforward. That is very true, just the way that the questions are written. We are going to look at a sample math SAT and a sample math ACT question in a couple of slides, and you will see the obvious difference between just how the questions are written. The ACT, even though it is more straightforward, though, something to keep in mind is that there is a lot less time per question. Both essays are optional, but we do recommend taking the ACT and the SAT with the writing or with the essay section at least once. Why is that? About 1/4 of universities require the essay as part of their application process. So 1/4 of universities are going to require that you have the ACT plus writing or the SAT including the essay as part of your application. So as you're doing your research, that is definitely a question that you should ask. And if you are planning on taking the ACT or the SAT or registering for the ACT or SAT in the next couple of months, and you're not exactly sure where you want to apply, or you're not exactly sure what the application standards are for those schools, I would highly suggest you take the essay, official essay, at least once. What happens if you take the ACT or the SAT without the writing section, and then you apply to a school that requires it? Well, you would have to take the entire ACT or SAT again plus writing, because you cannot just take the essay on its own. So again, if you're not exactly sure where you want to apply, or if you're not exactly sure what their application standards are, I would highly recommend you take the ACT or the SAT with the writing section at least once. Okay. The ACT has a science section, the SAT does not. However, what did we talk about? The ACT science section is not really a science section. It's a kind of a data-driven data analysis section. The ability to read charts and graphs is definitely tested in the ACT science section. However, it's tested throughout the SAT as well. So that skill of being able to read and analyze the information presented in a chart or graph is on both the ACT and the SAT. ACT, it's more condensed to the science section. The SAT, it is throughout the entire test. However, if science terms or if just the fact that it says science is really throwing you for a loop, then maybe the SAT is a better fit. The reading sections. The SAT has 5 reading passages and the ACT has 4 reading passages. Also, the SAT 5 reading passages will be more complex. The ACT 4 reading passages will be more straightforward. The math sections on both the SAT and the ACT do test very similar concept. The SAT math section does have a no calculator section though. So if that's something that, again, is going to really throw you for a loop, even though we've talked about it, right? You don't have to have the calculator for any of the sections of the SAT or the ACT. However, if not having access to it is really going to throw you for a loop, then maybe the ACT is the better fit. So we talked about why these tests that these tests are the marathon of tests. But I did want to just take a step back now that we've gone into some of the nitty-gritty of ACT versus SAT, and just talk about in general why these tests might cause students to struggle more than just their regular everyday high school exams. So again, the design of the tests, both the ACT and the SAT are timed, and they are not designed to finish. Even though the SAT might be a little bit more forgiving in the time per question category, that does not mean that it is as much time as you would possibly want or need, right? So both of these tests aren't designed for you to finish them. You do need to be using good time management. Whenever you take a test in high school, especially in math, for instance, it's typically, what did you learn this chapter or this module or this semester? On the ACT and the SAT, the math covers years of content. So just the pure breadth of talking about arithmetic, algebra 1 and 2, plane and coordinate geometry, and a little bit of trig is often overwhelming, having to jump back and forth. Another thing to keep in mind is that, especially on the ACT, you have to have a lot of those formulas memorized, especially for the geometry questions. So there's just a lot of content to not just be have reviewed, but be fresh and at front of mind, so you can quickly recover any of those formulas that you might need to answer a particular question. As far as the test itself, as far as high pressure, ability to perform under high pressure and how will you take it, I like the way that they phrase that. So there is a lot of stress surrounding and pressure surrounding the ACT and the SAT. So that additional testing anxiety, which is a very real thing, is very present on the ACT and the SAT. And then the final point I wanted to make on this slide is grading. On the ACT and the SAT, it's graded by a machine. For your high school exams, most of the time it's graded by a teacher that knows you and can be a little bit more subjective in how he or she decides to grade a test. The ACT and the SAT are graded by a machine. It's purely, is this question the answer that we wanted you to pick or not? Yes or no? That dictates how if you get a credit for that question or not. Okay. So preparation and planning are definitely key when it comes to these particular tests. So we want to keep this in mind as we're looking forward to when we might take the test. And looking forward meaning literally looking down the timeline. I don't think anyone's super jazzed about taking these tests, right? It's definitely something we want to keep in mind is that these tests require just a little bit of testing savvy. Now, if you have Facebook or have been on BuzzFeed, you have probably seen these before, right? Our student Hope has named the quadrilaterals Bob and Sam and my favorite, Teddyson, and find X, and a student has circled, here it is. Unfortunately, there is very little, if no, room for sarcasm on the ACT and the SAT. It is a pretty straightforward as far as answering questions types. Both of them are kind of tests. They're multiple choice tests for the most part, with the exception of the free response questions on the SAT and the essay on the ACT and the SAT. So the answer that they want you to pick that they've already decided is the right answer is there. It is up to you to decide which one it is. So not only are these tests long, not only do they test us on a ton of different material that we might not be used to doing an English test and then math test and then immediately reading test and science test, etc. if you're taking the ACT, but they also predict what mistakes you will most likely make, and then those predictably wrong answers will be possible answer choices. And as just a cohort, we are predictable people. People are predictable. So here's a quick question. Go ahead and think of a number. Just think of a number. And I want you to, obviously we're not all in the same room. So usually if we're in person, I have you raise your hand. I almost said that. That does not make any sense. You do not need to raise your hand from the comfort of your own home. But maybe put in the chat box or just think about if your number is over 100, let us know. Is your number over 100? Is your number, did you think of a negative number? Did you think of a decimal or a fraction? Did you think of a positive integer between 1 and 10? Most of you at home, if I had to predict, answered the latter. That you picked, whenever I said pick a number, you chose a positive integer between 1 and 10. That only works because that always works. And every time I do this presentation, that always is when the majority of people raise their hand, is that they picked a positive number between 1 and 10 because we are predictable. So what do cows drink? Whose first thought was milk? Cows do not drink milk. Cows produce milk. Cows drink water. Again, we are predictable people and we are predictable, therefore, test takers. Probably the ACT and the SAT is not going to ask you pick a number between 1 and 10. So how might they test how predictable we are? If a store raises the price of an item by 20%, then decreases the new price by 15%, what was the percent change in the price of the item? What is the predictably wrong answer here? If you thought 5%, that is correct. That is the predictably wrong answer. Why is that? Let's look at this. So if a store raises the price by 20%, so let's say that this original price is $100. Ooh, goodness, $100. 100, and that's a dollar sign. So if the original price is $100 and the store raises the price by 20%, 20% of 100 is $20, so our new price would be $120. They then decrease the new price by 15%. What's 15% of 120? Well, 10% is 12, so 5% would be 6. 12 plus 6 is 18, so subtract 18. So we have 104. Nope, that is wrong. My goodness. 102. That's 102. Please ignore my mental math skills and my terrible touchscreen writing. So what was the percent change of this price? It would then be 2%, not 5%, which would be the predictably wrong answer. So let's look at some ACT strategy. So particularly whenever we're talking about pacing. So when we're looking at pacing, we talked before about how there's not enough time, potentially not enough time to do every single question. So whenever we're working our way through, we need to ask ourselves, is our goal to answer every single question? So for the sake of the argument, we have twins. These twins have the exact same GPA. They've taken the exact same number of classes. The only thing that's different is how they're going to approach the sections on the SAT. So the first section of the SAT is 58 questions. Student number 1 has decided that he is going to attempt every single question. He's going to rush through and he is going to answer every single question. He attempts 58. In doing this, he gets 26 right and 32 wrong. When you get a question right on the SAT, you get a point. This is called your raw score. The student has a raw score of 26 on this particular section. This is then converted into our scale score, which is a 540. So this student received a 540 on this particular section of the SAT. Now, what about his twin brother? Now, he knows his goal is not to get a perfect score on this section. He is just trying to do the best that he can, and he recognizes that time is an issue for him. So instead of spending the entire time attempting all 58 questions, this student is only going to attempt 38. In only attempting 38, he slowed down. He made maybe a couple less predictably wrong answers. He spent a couple more minutes, caught some maybe bad math errors, or reread a question and now realizes he understands it differently. He gets 4 more right. This gives him a raw score of 30, which converts to a scale score of 580. Now, what about the last 20 questions? Does the student leave them blank? Absolutely not. You never, ever, ever, ever leave a question blank on the SAT or on the ACT or PSAT, or post-college if you're looking at grad school, the MCAT, LSAT, GRE, or GMAT. Do not leave questions blank on these standardized tests. Why? For every question you get right, you get a point. For every question you get wrong or leave blank, it's +0. Now, about 3 years ago now, I think, 2 or 3 years ago, the SAT overhauled. It did used to be true that you would lose points if you got questions wrong on the SAT, but that is no longer true. There is no what they would call a guessing penalty on the SAT anymore. Therefore, you should never leave a question blank. You should always at least guess. So for the last 20, this student fills in B. Just B for the last 20 questions. B happens to be the right answer 4 times. He now has a raw score of 34, which converts to a scale score of 610. A 70-point score difference between these two brothers, and the only thing that they did differently was how they approached this test. So that's one of the other ways that the ACT and the SAT are different from the other tests that we'll take at school. Because not only is it a matter of having reviewed the content, being mentally and physically ready to take the test, it's also about having a strategy of how we're going to approach the test. Do you have to answer all of the questions in order to get your goal score in that particular section? Or can you use your time to your benefit? Can you use your time to your advantage? Let's look at the ACT. So this is the math section of the ACT. Same sorts of things. First student rushes his way through, attempts all 60 questions, gets 30 right, 30 wrong for a scale score of what? Or excuse me, a raw score of what? A 30, because there's 30 questions right. So 1 point per question. So you'll get a raw score of 30, which converts to a scale score of a 20. His twin brother attempts just the first 45, gets 35 right out of those 45 questions. That's a raw score of 35 and a scale score of 22. Gets B on the last 15 questions. Why B? Because my last name is Bradley, so it's my favorite letter. No other reason. You can guess whichever letter you so choose. I would highly recommend that you're consistent in the guess that you choose, though, because you're statistically more likely to pick up points if you are filling in the same bubble. If you're just filling in a bubble, you haven't read it, you're purely guessing. Be consistent in your guessing. So student fills in B. B is the right answer 3 times, which gives him a raw score of 38 and a scale score of 24. A 4-point score difference. And again, the only thing that these students did differently was how they approached the test. So preparing for the ACT and the SAT is doable. And as a test prep company, but also just as someone who teaches and tutors for the ACT and also took the ACT and SAT myself, I would encourage you to do some prep. And the right coach and the right prep is going to make all of the difference. So let's look at a couple of sample problems with them. This would be an example of an SAT math sample problem. So Samantha is looking to join a judo dojo. The dojo charges a one-time membership fee of $129.99 and an additional $7 fee per session. A tax of 13% is applied to the membership fee, but not the sessional fee. Which of the following represents the total cost in dollars for attending N sessions? Now, students in the room, I am sure you have already started thinking about how you would potentially solve this problem. And parents in the room who maybe haven't done a math problem in a while, you have potentially broken out into a cold sweat. But we are going to walk through how the Princeton Review would encourage you and it would instruct you to answer this particular question. So first things first, let's break everything down into bite-sized pieces. One of the things that the SAT loves to do, and some of the ACT problems on word problems on the ACT as well, is that they like to throw a lot of information at you, and it can start to feel overwhelming. So let's break this down into bite-sized pieces. What information do you need to find? That is ultimately what's the most important, because this is going to be what tells us what the right answer is, right? So we want to make sure that we're able to quickly and correctly identify what information we need to find. So the total cost in dollars for attending N sessions, for attending a certain number of sessions. So Samantha's total cost. Next little bit of bite-sized pieces. What information do we have? We have that there's a one-time membership fee of $129.99. We have that there's an additional $7 fee per session, and that there's a 13% tax on membership, but that is not included to the additional session fees. So let's do some process of elimination. How many times does she pay $129.99? Just once, right? It's a one-time membership fee. So it's not going to be, we're not going to multiply or add to have recurring costs built onto that $129.99. It's just a one-time fee. What is the tax on? It is not on the sessional fee, it's just on the one-time membership fee. So that leaves us with C and D. What's the difference between C and D? Well, in C, they're adding the tax to 120, or the tax rate, not just the tax, but the tax rate to $129.99, and D, we're multiplying the tax rate. And how do you properly calculate how much tax will be? We know that we would need to multiply, so our answer is D. So break this problem down into bite-sized pieces and utilize good process of elimination as you work your way through the potential answer choices. Now remember, this is a multiple choice test for the most part, so the answer that they want us to pick is there in front of us. We just have to figure out which one it is. So here's an ACT math sample problem. If Claire is C years old and 6 years younger than Alan, in terms of C, how old will Alan be in 3 years? So we have this relationship between Claire and Alan's age, but they don't actually give us any ages to work with directly. So what can we do? This is a strategy that we teach that's called plugging in. Instead of saying Claire is C years old, let's say she's 10. So now Alan, so if she's 10, that means Alan is 16 because she is 6 years younger than Alan. So how old will Alan be in 3 years? 19. This is what we call then our target answer. So we have a value of C. Instead of using C, we're now going to plug in a value of 10. And we're going to look at the answer choices and see which one gives us our target answer of 19. So A will be 4, B will be 7, C will be 13, and D will be 19. That matches our target answer, so D is the correct answer. Plugging in is all about changing algebra questions into arithmetic questions. Arithmetic questions are almost always more straightforward than algebra questions. If a student is to read an algebra question and not know how to do the algebra, sometimes he or she might just feel stuck. Instead of just feeling stuck, we want them to always have a backup plan. One of those backup plans is plugging in, finding a different way to approach the question so we don't have to deal with the nasty algebra. So let's look at some prep timelines. If for the sophomores or parents of sophomores that we have on the call, prepping between summer or prepping during the summer between sophomore and junior year is a great time to get started. If you're looking at the ACT in September, prepping 6 weeks out before that ACT in September and keeping in mind that the materials will include PSAT prep materials. So that'll get you ready for the September ACT as well as the October PSAT. So this is going into your junior year. And then the December ACT, and then potentially the June SAT if you decided you wanted to take both. This would be a fantastic test prep outline. One of the things that I do want to remind everybody on the call is that the ACT and the SAT, although we can't just take it whenever we want, there are specific dates that you can register to take the ACT or the SAT. They are offered several times throughout the year. So maybe you're looking at this timeline and you're saying, but my busy sports season or work season or after school activity season is fall semester. Do I really want to add on prepping for the ACT or the SAT in the fall? No, you don't need to. You want to work around your schedule. When are you available? When is your busy season? When do you have the time to commit to actually preparing for the ACT and the SAT? The ACT and the SAT, again, are offered several times throughout the year, so it's really up to you what your best test prep plan is. So here we're looking at the SAT and what's offered. If you want to start with the SAT focus, prepping over the summer in preparation for the August SAT, taking the October PSAT, then the December SAT, and then maybe following up with the June ACT if you would like to try both tests. As juniors, we definitely want to make sure that we're getting our prep in as early as possible because now we need to be looking at timelines. So current juniors on the call, this is when you're definitely starting to look at what schools you might be interested in. You're potentially planning school visits, either if you haven't started already, maybe this summer or early next fall. Applications are due for most universities before the end of fall semester of your senior year. So you're looking at by the end of 2018 for potentially most of the schools that you're interested in, you will have needed to already applied, which means that you will have already need the ACT or SAT scores that you're wanting to submit in with your application. So February ACT has already passed. The April ACT, the national April ACT test date is April 14th. So we've got a couple of weeks, about a little less than a month before that April ACT. And if those are the schools that those are particular tests you're targeting, maybe then if you're thinking about the SAT, you can concentrate between April and August and tackle the SAT in August or this summer. I believe there will be an earlier administration of both the SAT and the ACT before August as well. And we're looking the next SAT that if you haven't started preparing for yet is probably feasible is not the March, but probably the May SAT now, since where we are in March. So we want to make sure that we're looking at the May SAT and then potentially the June SAT. And then if you want to take the ACT as well, looking at the September ACT. We talked a lot about the ACT and the SAT, which test is potentially a better fit, some strategies to keep in mind when preparing for both the tests. And they definitely are important, but I do not want to leave you with the impression that the ACT or the SAT are the end all and be all of college admissions, because that is just not true. Whenever we're talking about getting into the colleges of our dreams, it's much more than just our ACT or SAT scores. At the Princeton Review, we talk about the 3 pillars of college admissions: great grades, great test scores, and great applications. Great grades being the most important of the 3. Call our high school transcripts, the classes that we're taking and the grades that we're getting in those classes are the most important component of our college admissions application. Great test scores, ACT and SAT scores definitely factor into that bucket, but we will also be looking at PSAT, AP test scores, SAT subject tests. There's lots of other standardized tests that we didn't talk about today that are definitely incorporated into that umbrella of great test scores. And great applications. Not just that you spelled your name correctly, which you should always proofread. I have several college admissions counselor friends, and you'd be surprised how many people spell their name wrong on their application. So always proofread. But it's not just a matter that it is filled out correctly or turned in on time. Great applications also involves the right fit school. Finding the best fit school for you. We have over 2,000 universities in the United States alone, and lots of good options. Your dream school you might not have even heard of yet. So I would really encourage you to do your research. Start your research with some meditation. Think about, what do you want from your college experience? What are your needs? What are the things that you definitely don't want? Your deal breakers. And start doing your research. What schools fit your list of needs and don't have your deal breakers? Putting together a great application is definitely about filling it out correctly and getting it in on time, but it's also about it being compelling. It's college admissions officers' jobs to find students who will be a good fit for their campus, who will make their school better. And if you're passionate about the school that you're applying to, you'll be able to convey that so much easier in your application, in your personal statement, or just in the way that you fill it out, what you include, and potentially your interview. If you have the opportunity to do an interview, always encourage you to take that opportunity, especially if you are passionate about the school. Just one more person that you can talk about how much you would want to go there and how much you love about that university. The Princeton Review started as a test prep company. That is our flagship program, and that is what we are best known for, our ACT, SAT, and other standardized test prep. As a test prep teacher, I definitely love being able to help students and working with students one-on-one, either in person or in live online webinars like these. But the Princeton Review is about helping students with all three pillars. We have programs to help you get those better grades. If you're struggling in school, we have academic tutoring available to you. It's available 24/7 and it's live online. So wherever you have data or Wi-Fi, so your phone, your tablet, your computer, you can receive immediate access to any any expert in a particular field that you might be studying. So let's say you're working on geometry homework later tonight and you're stuck on question 15. Instead of having to wait till tomorrow to talk to your teacher, why don't you try out what we call Princeton Review Homework Help tonight? Our homework help program, you can take a picture or scan your problem, load it into your online student center, your online portal, and indicate that you're working on geometry. Be matched with the geometry tutor in under a minute, and that tutor will help you walk through that particular problem. They're not going to give you the answer, so I don't want to promise that, but they will help you find the answer on your own. That session would then be recorded, so you can always go back and watch that again if you have any problems. With our test prep, our ACT and SAT, we have in-person as well as live online group classes as well as one-on-one. So if there's just one particular area that you want to talk about, maybe math is giving you some trouble and you just want to talk about math, our one-on-one tutors will customize a program just for you. And if you're looking to get some additional help with college admissions, that's definitely something that we can do as well. Whether it's helping you find your best fit school, or actually putting together your application, writing your personal statement, preparing for your on-campus interviews, we definitely also offer those college admission services as well. So our final poll for the night is going to be if you would like someone to reach out to you from the Princeton Review. If you would like to talk to someone about either preparing for the ACT or the SAT, getting homework help, getting help picking your best fit school, or putting your applications together, these are all things that we offer. I am super jazzed to be able to offer free online services like these, free informational sessions, and I'm going to open it up to questions in just a minute. And I apologize that I went a little long, and I'm going to definitely stick around to answer your questions, or we'll answer your questions later. So if you have any questions, please feel free to write them in the chat box, and I'll read them and answer them, and we can work our way through these questions.
Thanks, Teresa.
Oh, you're welcome.
We have quite a few questions, so I'm not going to be able to get through all of them, but let's definitely go ahead and get started. Again, for those of you who didn't catch us at the beginning, you can always email questions@review.com. So if you leave the session today and feel like your question wasn't answered, feel free to email us at questions@review.com, and we will try and respond there. But let's go ahead and open up the questions panel.
This is also my email address on the screen right now, so feel free to email me too. Just saying.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. Where should we start? Carolina asks, what grades do colleges look at? Cumulative weighted or cumulative simple? She also asks, would taking both the SAT and ACT get you more scholarships?
Okay, so let's tackle the first question. So the college admissions officers are going to look at your transcript as a whole. So they'll be looking at all the classes that you took throughout your 4 years, as well as the grades that you took in them. If your school does offer a weighted GPA or a weighted GPA scale of some sort, along with your transcript, whenever your high school sends your transcript to the school that you're interested in, they will send an explanation of how they grade and what their scale is. to answer your question, kind of, yes. Yes, so look at those things. ACT and SAT, yes, there is an opportunity to get more scholarship money if you take both tests. Maybe not directly from the school, but some scholarship programs do require one test over the other. For instance, the National Merit Scholarship, that's the PSAT is the qualifying test for national merit. In order to continue on with the national merit kind of competition and to be a national merit scholar, you will have to take the SAT. And some scholarships are ACT specific. When we're ever talking about merit scholarships from the school, they will be calculating using whatever materials you send in as your for your application.
Great. Do colleges look at PSAT scores?
So if you can decide, you can decide if schools get to see that and if you want your college to look at that. Colleges will not just automatically receive your scores because you've taken the test. If you do include that on your transcript, if you're proud of your PSAT scores, if, for instance, you did become a National Merit Scholar or a commended scholar, etc., I would definitely include that on your transcript, and schools will look at that. It is not a college admissions test. It will not replace the ACT or the SAT, but schools will look at it if you provide that material.
Great. Someone asks, how can I avoid being tricked on the reading questions?
That is a great question, and probably not your favorite answer, but practice. The more practice you have with the question styles and the questioning types, the more familiar you'll be with the potential traps and you won't fall for them. Remember, the ACT and the SAT are both very standardized. So the types of questions and the types of traps, excuse me, are going to be consistent test over test. So practice is really the best answer to that question.
Great. Another question. Do certain administrations of the test tend to be easier in some months over other months?
No, ma'am. They are standardized. They are consistent. There is a consistent level of difficulty, administration over administration. There is no quote unquote easy month.
Great. Someone asked a question I think I can answer. Do we offer other services like this webinar? Yes, we do. To check out our schedule, you can go to princetonreview.com/webinars. You can also review, we have a webinar archive there, so you can see any previous session we've recorded. But be sure to check back occasionally because we're always adding new webinars. I think maybe we'll take 2 more questions if that's okay with you, Teresa.
Perfectly fine. I'm the one who went over, so I'll stick around.
Okay. We've got a question. How do I decide what SAT subject test to take?
Okay, that is a very good question. So we did not talk about SAT subject tests today in particular, but SAT subject tests, I'm going to take them for 2 reasons. Some schools require them or quote unquote highly recommend them. If it's highly recommended, I would definitely just consider that required. They are subject specific tests. They're tests written by the same people that write the SAT, so they're called SAT subject tests or SAT2s. They are also, other than being required, are a great way to highlight your strengths. So some students, most students do not have to take them. But if you know that you are really good or you want to show how good you are in a particular subject or a particular area, that's kind of what should help determine which test to take. Some schools, if you know that you're interested in a particular school or a particular program, you should definitely check out their admissions page and their admissions standards and requirements to see if they do require it. They might even have specific requirements about which tests they want to see from you if they require SAT subject tests. But your passions and your strengths, that is how I would say most students should decide which SAT subject tests to take, is what are you passionate about and where are your academic strengths?
Great. And then this will be our last question for the night, but again, please feel free to email us either at questions@review.com or Teresa's email here on the screen. But a few folks have asked, if you do poorly on one test and then do better, can you control what you send to the school? Like what does the school see?
Definitely, that's a phenomenal question. Whenever you register for the ACT or the SAT, you're going to be prompted to register and just receive the scores yourself, or go ahead and send the scores to a certain number of schools. I would suggest you just have the scores sent to yourself, because that way you can control what the school sees. So, for instance, if you did end up having a bad test day, you don't want to find that out the same day that your dream school finds that out, right? You want to be able to control that information. Most schools only want to see your best score. So most schools only want that one best attempt on either the ACT or SAT or both if you've taken both and you want to send both. Some schools do require all your scores. Now, if a school is requiring all your scores, they're probably doing this for a couple different reasons. First, they might be one of our hyper-selective schools, and they want to see how many times you took the test. What do you think I mean by hyper-selective? Those are our Yales, our Harvards, etc. Or they're doing what's called super scoring, where they're taking your best performance on each subject and recalculating your total or your composite for that particular test. So maybe on the first time you took it, you really killed English and reading, the ACT, and the second time you really killed math and science. They would take your best performance, English, math, reading, and science over the two tests or multiple tests and re-average your composite. So to recap, yes, you do have control of what schools see and what schools receive because you can control what you send them. And some schools want just your best score, and some schools want all your scores, potentially because they're super scoring, and that will end up helping you at the end of the day. So you do have that control.
Great. Well, thank you, Teresa, and thank you to everyone who's been engaged and joining us on this Monday evening. I hope you have a great rest of your week and feel free to continue to send us questions if you have any. Thanks, guys. Have
Definitely.
a great night.
I will, I'm already receiving some questions to my inbox, and I will answer everybody by end of business tomorrow. So feel free to save my email and email me if you have any questions.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.